I think every family has sibling rivalry. You know, we also had great times together, but our struggles were definitely brought to the forefront.
You think you know everything about the Presley family fortune? Think again. Because what I'm about to tell you will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about Elvis's legacy and the shocking greed that's been tearing this legendary family apart from the inside. Navarone Garibaldi just inherited millions from his half-sister Lisa Marie Presley's estate. And before her body was even cold, he was already plotting his next move. We're talking about a man who walked away with a fortune that most people can only dream of. But apparently, that wasn't enough. No, Navarone had his eyes on an even bigger prize: Elvis Presley's protected estate assets. Here's where this gets absolutely insane. Within months of Lisa Marie's death, Navarone's legal team started filing paperwork that would make your head spin. They weren't just going after pocket change either. We're talking about challenging ownership rights to some of the most valuable intellectual property in entertainment history. The name Elvis Presley alone is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and Navarone wanted his piece of that pie. But here's what nobody saw coming. Navarone didn't just inherit money from Lisa Marie, he inherited her legal strategies, her inside knowledge of the estate's vulnerabilities, and most shocking of all, he inherited her resentment toward how the Elvis empire had been managed. Lisa Marie had spent years fighting these same battles, and apparently she passed down more than just money to her half-brother. She passed down a roadmap for revenge. The numbers we're dealing with here are staggering. Navarone's inheritance from Lisa Marie is estimated to be worth at least $15 million, maybe more. That's generational wealth right there. But according to sources close to the family, Navarone saw that money as just the beginning. He believed he was entitled to a much larger slice of the Elvis fortune, and he was willing to tear the family apart to get it. Now here's where this story takes a dark turn. Navarone wasn't some distant relative making a desperate grab for money. This was Lisa Marie's own half-brother, someone who had grown up knowing the intimate details of how Elvis's estate operated, who had access to family secrets that outsiders could never dream of uncovering. He knew exactly where the bodies were buried, so to speak. His legal strategy was brilliant and terrifying at the same time. Instead of going after the obvious assets, Navarone's team focused on what they called overlooked inheritance rights. They argued that certain provisions in Elvis's original will had been misinterpreted over the decades, and that as a member of the extended Presley family, Navarone had legitimate claims to assets that had been locked away for years. The family was blindsided. Priscilla Presley, who had spent decades carefully protecting Elvis's legacy and building it into a business empire worth over $500 million, suddenly found herself facing a legal challenge from within her own family. This wasn't some stranger trying to cash in on Elvis's fame. This was her own son-in-law's child, someone she had welcomed into family gatherings, someone who had sat at her dinner table. But Navarone's timing was calculated and ruthless. He waited until the family was at their most vulnerable, still reeling from Lisa Marie's sudden death, still figuring out how to manage her debts and her own estate complications. Then he struck with a legal offensive that nobody saw coming. The amounts he was going after weren't small either. According to leaked court documents, Navarone's initial claims totaled over $40 million in what he called misallocated inheritance distributions. He wasn't just asking for money, he was demanding ownership stakes in Elvis Presley Enterprises, royalty rights to some of Elvis's most famous songs, and even partial control over Graceland's commercial operations. And here's the most shocking part of all. Navarone had evidence to back up some of his claims. Years of Lisa Marie's financial struggles had created paper trails, legal precedents, and documentation that painted a picture of an estate that had been mismanaged for decades. He wasn't just throwing accusations around. He had receipts. The family tried to handle this quietly at first, hoping to avoid the kind of public scandal that could damage the carefully cultivated Elvis brand. But Navarone wasn't interested in quiet settlements or behind-the-scenes negotiations. He wanted everything out in the open, and he was prepared to use every dirty secret he knew to get what he believed was rightfully his. What happened next would change the Presley family forever and expose just how far someone will go when millions of dollars are on the line. But wait, it gets so much worse. Because what we discovered next about the hidden wars inside the Presley fortune will make your blood run cold. This wasn't just about Navarone getting greedy. This was about decades of family manipulation, secret deals, and power plays that had been happening behind closed doors while the world thought the Presley legacy was in safe hands. Here's what nobody knew. Priscilla Presley had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. For years, she had been quietly consolidating power over Elvis's estate, making strategic moves that would ensure her control over the empire for decades to come. But Navarone had been watching, learning, and planning his own countermove. The bombshell came when Navarone's legal team revealed that Lisa Marie had shared explosive family secrets with him before her death. We're talking about recorded conversations, private emails, and documentation that exposed how Priscilla had allegedly manipulated Elvis's estate structure to benefit herself, at the expense of other potential heirs. Navarone wasn't just making random claims, he had insider intelligence that could destroy reputations and reshape the entire Presley legacy. But here's where this story gets absolutely diabolical. Navarone positioned himself as the forgotten heir, claiming that his connection to the family through his mother, Priscilla, had given him unique insights into how Elvis's wishes had been systematically ignored over the years. He argued that Elvis would have wanted his wealth distributed more fairly among family members, not hoarded by a small inner circle. The legal loopholes Navarone tried to exploit were genius-level devious. His lawyers discovered that certain interpretations of Elvis's original trust documents could potentially extend inheritance rights to step-grandchildren under specific circumstances. They found precedents in celebrity estate law that suggested blood relatives weren't the only ones entitled to inheritance claims. It was a legal Hail Mary that could have rewritten the rules for how celebrity estates operate forever. And Priscilla? She was furious. Sources close to the family revealed that she felt completely betrayed by her own son's actions. This was the child she had raised, the family member she had trusted with intimate knowledge about the business operations, and now he was using that trust against her. The family dinners stopped. The phone calls ended. Navarone had declared war on his own mother. But here's what made this situation absolutely explosive. Navarone wasn't acting alone. He had connected with other disgruntled family members and former business associates who had their own grievances against how the Elvis empire had been managed. He was building a coalition of people who felt they had been cheated out of their fair share of the Presley fortune. The secrets that started coming out were devastating. Internal financial records showed that certain family members had received preferential treatment in business deals. Marketing contracts had been awarded to companies with family connections. Revenue from Elvis's music and merchandising had been distributed in ways that seemed to favor Priscilla's direct interests over the broader family legacy. Navarone's team even uncovered evidence that some of Elvis's personal belongings, items worth millions of dollars, had been quietly sold or transferred without proper documentation. They claimed that artwork, jewelry, and even some of Elvis's famous jumpsuits had been moved around in ways that violated the spirit of the original estate planning. The most shocking revelation was about Graceland itself. Navarone's lawyers argued that the mansion's transformation into a tourist attraction had generated far more revenue than the family had ever publicly disclosed, and that this money had been funneled into investment vehicles that primarily benefited Priscilla's financial interests rather than preserving Elvis's legacy for future generations. But Priscilla wasn't going down without a fight. Her legal team launched a vicious counteroffensive. painting Navarone as an opportunistic outsider who was trying to capitalize on family tragedy for personal gain. They revealed embarrassing details about his own financial struggles, suggesting that his legal challenge was motivated purely by desperation rather than any legitimate claims to Elvis's fortune. The family civil war was tearing apart relationships that had been built over decades. Relatives were forced to choose sides. Business partners were pulled into the conflict. Even longtime employees of Elvis Presley Enterprises found themselves caught in the crossfire, as both sides demanded loyalty and information. And through it all, the Elvis brand was taking a beating. Every leaked document, every court filing, every family accusation was damaging the carefully crafted image of Elvis as America's beloved king of rock and roll. The fighting was turning his legacy into a soap opera, and everyone involved knew it. But Navarone didn't care about preserving anyone's reputation. He was convinced that he was fighting for justice, that he was exposing years of corruption and mismanagement that had betrayed Elvis's memory and cheated legitimate heirs out of their birthright. The question everyone was asking was simple. How far would this family go to destroy each other over money that Elvis never intended to become a source of such bitter conflict? But here's where Navarone's master plan started crumbling in the most spectacular way possible. Because what happened next proves that when you're dealing with that much money and that much family hatred, even the smartest strategies can backfire in ways that destroy everything you thought you had. The first crack in Navarone's empire came when sources revealed how he had been burning through his Lisa Marie inheritance at an absolutely reckless pace. We're talking about someone who went from $15 million to desperate financial straits in less than 2 years. The spending was insane. Luxury cars, high-end real estate investments that went south, and business ventures that collapsed faster than anyone could have predicted. But here's what makes this story so tragic and infuriating at the same time. Navarone wasn't just spending his own money. He had borrowed against his expected Elvis estate settlement, essentially gambling with money he didn't even have yet. Financial institutions had given him massive credit lines based on his projected legal victories. And when those victories didn't materialize, the debt collectors came knocking with a vengeance. The desperate measures he took next were absolutely shocking. Navarone started liquidating personal assets that had sentimental value to the entire Presley family. Items that Lisa Marie had left him, not as investments but as keepsakes and family heirlooms, were being sold to private collectors and auction houses. We're talking about personal letters from Elvis, family photographs, and even pieces of jewelry that had been in the family for generations. Priscilla was devastated. These weren't just valuable items. They were irreplaceable pieces of family history that were being scattered to the winds because her son couldn't control his spending. The emotional damage was almost worse than the financial betrayal. Every item that showed up at auction was like a knife in the back of Elvis's legacy. But Navarone's legal team was pushing him toward even more desperate gambles. They convinced him that his best shot at accessing Elvis's protected assets was to challenge the fundamental structure of the estate itself. This wasn't just about claiming inheritance rights anymore. This was about trying to prove that the entire way Elvis's estate had been managed for decades was legally invalid. The strategy was nuclear-level risky. If Navarone won, he would potentially have access to hundreds of millions of dollars in Elvis-related assets. But if he lost, he would be responsible for massive legal fees, court costs, and potentially even damages for frivolous litigation. We're talking about a legal gamble that could either make him incredibly wealthy or completely destroy him financially. And the family pressure was becoming unbearable. Priscilla had cut off all communication with Navarone, refusing to speak to him or acknowledge him as part of the family. Other relatives were taking sides, and the Presley family gatherings that had been happening for decades were now impossible because of the toxic atmosphere Navarone's legal challenges had created. The mounting debts were crushing him from every direction. The lawyers representing him in the Elvis estate case were demanding payment for their services. We're talking about legal fees that were climbing towards 7 figures. The creditors who had loaned him money against his expected settlement were getting increasingly aggressive about repayment, and his personal expenses were still out of control because he couldn't or wouldn't adjust his lifestyle to match his actual financial reality. Here's where the story takes its most desperate turn. Navarone's team discovered that there might be one last avenue for accessing Elvis's money, a legal loophole related to estate mismanagement that could potentially trigger a complete reorganization of how Elvis's assets were controlled. But pursuing this strategy would require even more money up front, money that Navarone didn't have. So, he made the most dangerous financial decision of his life. He borrowed against everything he had left: his house, his remaining inheritance assets, even future royalty payments from his own minor entertainment ventures. He was essentially betting his entire financial future on one last, desperate legal Hail Mary that had maybe a 10% chance of success. The legal showdown that followed was brutal and humiliating. Navarone's lawyers presented their case with everything they had, but the evidence just wasn't strong enough to overturn decades of established estate management. The judge was clearly skeptical of the claims from the beginning. And when the ruling came down, it was devastating. Not only did Navarone lose his case completely, but the court ordered him to pay substantial legal fees for the other side. We're talking about additional debts that pushed his total obligations well over the value of everything he owned. The man who had started this journey as a multi-millionaire was now facing potential bankruptcy. But the real devastation was still coming, because the consequences of his legal gamble were about to destroy not just his finances, but his relationships, his reputation, and any chance he had of ever being welcomed back into the Presley family fold. Now here comes the bombshell that nobody saw coming, and it's going to change everything you thought you knew about this entire story. Because what we discovered about Navarone's real motivations will absolutely blow your mind, and the aftermath of his legal gamble has left the Presley family in ruins in ways that go far beyond money. The shocking truth that emerged during the final court proceedings was that Navarone had been manipulated from the very beginning. It turns out that his legal team had been feeding him false hope and exaggerated claims about his chances of success, all while billing him massive fees that were draining his inheritance faster than anyone realized. These lawyers saw a grieving, angry young man with millions of dollars, and they exploited him mercilessly. But here's the part that will make your blood boil. Lisa Marie had actually tried to warn Navarone about these exact lawyers before her death. In private conversations that only came to light after the legal disaster, she had specifically told him to avoid the legal firm he eventually hired, because she knew they had a reputation for taking advantage of wealthy clients in emotional distress. Navarone ignored her advice, and it cost him everything. But perhaps the cruelest irony of all is that Navarone's actions have actually strengthened Priscilla's control over Elvis's estate. The legal challenges he brought were so thoroughly defeated that they created new precedents that make it even harder for future claimants to challenge the estate's structure. He didn't just fail to get what he wanted. He actually made it impossible for anyone else to ever try the same strategy. Today, Navarone Garibaldi remains a cautionary tale about what happens when family loyalty, personal greed, and massive amounts of money collide in the worst possible way. He had everything handed to him, and he threw it all away chasing a dream of even more wealth that was never realistic to begin with. The Presley family legacy will probably never recover from the damage this legal war caused, and Elvis's memory has been tarnished by the ugly spectacle of his own family members tearing each other apart over money he never intended to become a source of such bitter conflict. What do you think about Navarone's shocking downfall? Was he a victim of manipulation or just pure greed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more explosive celebrity family drama that will leave you speechless.